Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today's episode 48, and I'm glad to have you. If you haven't followed the podcast already, make sure you follow, subscribe, like, whatever you want to do with it. Just make sure you keep coming back. My next guest is a fellow TikTok influencer who focuses on discussing the difficult topic of abuse. His community has grown to over 237,000 followers with the ultimate goal of helping people heal and find their way out of toxic and abusive relationships. I'm pleased to have Adam from Toxic Abuse Anonymous on TikTok here with me. Adam, how are you?
Hey, how are you, Dylan? I just can't thank you enough for having me on. I feel privileged. I'm a big fan of yours.
I appreciate that. I mean, it's always interesting to meet fellow TikTok influencers and then have these conversations with people that I've been following and you've been following me for quite some time. We finally made this conversation happen, and I'm really excited for it.
Me too. Me too. Question is, where are we going to start?
Absolutely. Well, I would say we start with your story. You tell me. I would love to hear, what made you eventually come to TikTok, right? Because it's certainly not a normal platform for 32-year-old, and I'm assuming that you're older than 32-year-old men jump to and start talking on. So I would love to hear that story, if you don't mind.
Well, then, you know what we'll do? We'll skip the long story of how I gained all this knowledge about toxic relationships, and we'll skip to, let's do it this way. 20 years ago, I got divorced. I had 3 beautiful children, a beautiful wife, a beautiful home. I owned a huge brokerage firm on Wall Street, huge. And my life went to straight crap overnight. And I do mean overnight. I ended up with sole custody of 3 children. The baby is only 21 years old. And if you look behind me, there's a doorway over there. Her bedroom is empty because she's finally moved out. So I'm no stranger to a malignant narcissist relationship. And I tried my hardest to make it work. And then I ended up with sole custody. If we flash forward to 5 years ago, I finally met the love of my life. I mean, somebody that got out of a car and I said, that's the one. That's who you waited for. She makes a lot of money. So she wasn't interested in my money. She has her own children. She's smart. She's beautiful. She's fun. Everything you could check off on a list except for one little thing. Psychopath. That wasn't on the list for some reason. I didn't have that there. And even if I checked it off, I might have gone forward anyway. That's the truth. And we went into a relationship that was the most toxic thing I've ever done in my entire life. And believe me, I'm no stranger from coming from Wall Street. And I actually ended up owning a construction company and demolition company where we take down nuclear power plants. And I promise you, there isn't a nuclear power plant in the world that's as toxic as that relationship. So I went through every stage of narcissistic abuse. And I kept going back and trying to save this relationship. I used every bit of my brain power, but I couldn't do it. We broke up about a year ago. After we broke up, I was discarded. I was a piece of trash. It didn't matter that I raised my children. It didn't matter that I've had successes. It doesn't matter that I'm 53 years old and fully retired. All that matters is that I'm a piece of trash. And so there I am sitting in my trash, literally. And my neighbors were walking by going, oh, look, somebody threw out a perfectly good white boy. It was like, I couldn't pull myself out. And it was a really depressing time in my life, a very dark time in my life. And as I gained knowledge, I said, okay, you got to figure out what's going on, because she doesn't know your ex-wife. She doesn't know your ex-girlfriend. She doesn't know anybody. And I don't know her exes. So if all of her exes have become unalive, or have become maniacs or desperate or all these crazy stories I heard, and they don't know each other. Well, she must be the common link. But if all of my exes are narcissistic and they don't know each other, I must be the common link. So I took a deep dive and I started finding out and making and applying business algorithms to mental health. There's a certain way of accomplishing a demolition, a construction, a Wall Street plan. And I just took that same philosophy and said, okay, let's take this apart piece by piece and we'll discuss some of that. But and I made it through, and I made it to the other side. And one of my best friends is head of child psychology of a very large American hospital known for child psychology. And she turned around and said, okay, you made it through the storm, but now you need therapy. Now you need group therapy. And I don't really like groups. And I don't like going out to groups. So I said, okay, I'll make a group. So I made a little video. I put it on TikTok. Now, for years, every time I was discarded in this toxicity that I was in, I had a TikTok. And I would go on and tell jokes. And sometimes I was in a dark place and I would tell dark jokes or light jokes. And just said, you know, you're not laughing, but maybe you can make people laugh. And I would go live and play my piano. And I'd have 500 people in my room and I'm singing and playing piano. And I'm just having a good time. And I said, you know what? Maybe I'll just start a group. So I made a video saying, this is Toxic Abuse Anonymous. And I know what you've been through. Come here. There's no judgment, just kindness. You're not crazy. You're not alone. And then within 3 weeks, 150,000 people showed up and joined the group. And I said, I thought there'd be 50,
Yeah.
not 150,000. And it just took off. And then from there, as you know, now it's 4 or 5 months and we're breaching 250,000, let's say. And we even have our own app, which we'll discuss later on. But that's the birth of it. As I said, you know, you used every bit of your power, every bit of your resources, every bit of your thoughts to figure out what's going on here. But some people don't think like that. Some people don't act like that. Some people aren't retired and can spend all their time doing all this research, reading medical papers and everything else. I said, somebody is going to end up hurting themselves. There's got to be more people like me. It can't just be me.
Yeah.
And that is the birth of the group.
And you're absolutely right. Like it takes time. Like it's not a, you know, time is not the all-encompassing factor that makes healing possible, but it does take time, right? It's just one of the factors. It's one of the necessities for anything, overcoming anything really. And I'm curious, what on top of time kind of brought you to, you know, you look at it from a very algorithmic mindset. What about mental health makes you consider that? Like why bring algorithms into it? What about mental health were you able to kind of decipher and put into an equation?
Well, let's talk about time first. If you break your arm and you don't set it right, it will heal, but it will heal broken. And once that happens, there's no correcting the problem. So if somebody wounded, nobody's broken. But if people get wounded and they don't heal right, I mean, you served our country, I believe, right?
Still do. Yeah.
Oh, and thank you. And thank you. Anyway, so imagine a bullet enters your body and it's not bleeding. So you put a Band-Aid over the hole. What happened to the bullet? Well, if you don't get that bullet out of there, it's going to fester. You're going to go staph infection and you're going to die. So just healing through time is not enough. The truth of the matter is there are some principles here. Knowledge is power. If you really understand what's going on, well, then you can start to live with it, because Einstein says things like, if you can't explain it in simple terms, then you don't understand it. And he's talking about quantum physics, not about mental health. He's talking about the hardest subjects in the world. And the other things are basic principles are, I can say things to people, and I do this in my lives. As you know, I go live, I get 35,000 people. It's a phenomenon, like crazy in my lives. But what I'll say is, I'll give an example such as this. I'm sorry for that. What I'll say is, you don't love your dog. Dylan, do you have a dog?
Oh yeah.
Okay, if I say to you, you don't love your dog, what will you say back?
I would ask you what your definition of love is.
Okay, what you would say is, that doesn't affect me, Adam, because I know I love my dog,
Right.
right? That's what you're really saying back,
Yeah.
saying, well, you got a messed up definition of love because I love my dog.
Yeah.
Don't mess with my dog. So it doesn't really affect you.
Yeah.
But if you're in my group because of a toxic relationship, and I look at you in the face and I say, Dylan, she never loved you. You were never special to her. You have to understand she's incapable of love. And everything you thought was coincidental. She never loved you. Well, people in my group go, ouch. And I say, you're saying ouch because somewhere inside of you, you know it's the truth. And the truth does two things. It hurts, but it also will set you free. You know, if you're going to sit there and say, why don't they love me anymore? You're never going to be healed. But if you figure out that they never loved you, you're working a new path. So
it's an interesting idea. This, this idea of love, right? And I certainly don't disagree with you in most regards, but I find it really difficult to think that even people that are narcissistic, because I've met some, it's very interesting. I think it's very much how people define love. And I hesitate when I say this person never loved you. And I understand why you do it, but I do hesitate when I say this person never loved you, because a definition of love that is different from yours can feel quite toxic. And
well,
so
let's give it a definition for this program right now.
certainly.
Now, you can define love through poetry, through songs. There are a million definitions of love. So that you and I can agree what love actually is, I'm going to propose that we use one definition.
Certainly.
And here is the definition I will propose. And it is what I propose plus every million things out there. I'm not limiting love because love is unlimited.
Yep.
But certainly love is receiving joy from putting somebody else's wants, needs, or priorities in front of your own. So let's go back to your dog. You're going to go to the store and you're going to buy a bone. That's your cash. You earned that cash. You're going to wait online. You're going to bring the bone home and you're going to show the bone to your dog. Dog's going to wag its tail. You're going to smile. You give the dog the bone. The dog runs around in a couple of circles, figures out how to lock the bone down to the floor and starts eating it. Tail is wagging. Everybody's happy. You didn't get a bone. You're out $5, $10 for the bone. And somehow you're happy. You've received joy by putting the dog's needs, wants, and priorities in front of your own.
Yeah.
So another example would be mother to baby. Babies don't know what love is. They don't know what anything is. They just got pushed out of a little hole and they're screaming. They know they're cold. They know they're scared. They know they're hungry, but they don't know love. And somehow or another, mother is ecstatic holding her baby. That is love. But, and now if we can agree on that just basic principle that love is a million things, but for our purposes, putting somebody else's wants, needs, or desires in front of your own, but somehow receiving joy from doing it, the gift of giving, is certainly one major part of love.
I would agree. I've always defined love as action without expectation, very, very simply. And it very much fits
Bingo.
that. The only difference that mine has between yours and mine is yours is a reception of joy, whereas mine doesn't have that factor. And so that's one interesting thing about your definition versus mine, is that, there's certainly this conception that love makes you happy, but I don't know if I agree with that. Love doesn't
Why
always
don't we
have to
do
make you
this?
happy.
Why don't we do this? Let's just put it, because I like your definition a lot. So why don't we remove joy? Just say putting somebody else's wants, needs, desires, priorities in front of your own. Whether you do it for joy, whether you do it for necessity, whether you do it for love, love is an action word. People say the word love, but you don't say love, you do love.
Right.
And okay, so we agree.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about toxic relationships. And now you'll understand why I use algorithms and things that most people will not, to figure out what the hell is going on. So if you look up and just Google anywhere, the 5 stages of love, 7 stages, some people say 8, some people say 3, but there are stages to love.
Mm-hmm.
So where did this come from? And the answer comes from places most people don't look. The answer doesn't come in poetry, it comes in our history. So a couple 100,000 years ago, there weren't a lot of humans. But luckily, the ones that survived, and probably survived only because of this reason, the male figures got testosterone. The female figures got estrogen. Both of them drive lust, desire. That's what testosterone does. Protect what's yours, go conquer, go make more humans. That's what estrogen does, the need to mate. If you look at the wild kingdom, you'll see them go into heat. Well, we do too. We kind of go into heat. We got to mate. If not for that testosterone and estrogen, humans wouldn't be here. There'd be no podcast, because that's why we did it. So now we have this desire filled with endorphins to go mate. And we meet a potential mate. And this is every human on earth, including the narcissist, including psychopaths. They don't have a testosterone deficiency. They don't have an estrogen deficiency. So what happens is you mate, you meet someone. Well, that creates what's called dopamine. You're familiar with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So dopamine, the word itself, transfers out to all the rest of the dopes like heroin and Oxycontin. It's all dope, because all of those things do when you take heroin is release dopamine. Well, when you have endorphins and you find your mate, you release the dopamine. It's the same thing as heroin. In fact, I can get into studies, but I don't want to bore everybody. So now comes secondary stage of love, early attachment. It's a dopamine fest. Most people will say, I didn't see the red flags. You cannot see the red flags. You're in what's called euphoria. Your entire body is flooded with dopamine. There is no red flag. Doesn't matter. This person could tell you that he just buried 10 bodies. Doesn't matter. Euphoria is euphoria. A couple of studies like the Uberman studies, just to make a reference here, is they study brain scans of somebody who just took cocaine and brain scans of somebody who has just been love bombed. They are identical. The parts of your frontal lobe that should be looking at red flags and caution are dark, no electricity. There are no red flags because you cannot see them on cocaine. You're like, go, go, go. Same thing applies, though, as you're withdrawing from cocaine. The front lobes that only see red flags, and the part that would tell you to go, the green flag is dark. You only see red flags. Well, if you look at somebody withdrawing from a toxic relationship, that's what their brain scan looks like, that all they can see is negativity and problems. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is just normal. I don't care if the person's a narcissist or not. This is normal behavior for humankind. This is how we all got here, 8 billion of us. Here is where the problem lies. The third stage of love is always the same. And in 20 different languages, they call it 20 different things, but it all amounts to crisis. Some obstacle hits. Somebody gets scared. Somebody backs off. Some kid gets sick. Some pandemic breaks out. Whatever it is, it's called crisis mode. And in crisis mode, all your dopamine drains out. And you're like, what am I doing? I don't love this person. I don't want to get locked up here. I don't want to get committed here. What am I doing? What am I doing? A healthy human being overcomes the obstacle by bonding to that person. You bond from something called oxytocin. Mm-hmm. So when a mother has a baby, she feels her baby, touches her baby. They always give it to her when possible, skin to skin. She produces oxytocin and bonds to the baby. The male figure comes over, touches mother and baby and bonds to them. And I'm talking 200,000 years ago, not today. Today it could be estrogen to estrogen. Today it could be female to female, male to male. It doesn't matter. But the oxytocin is the same. It bonds you to this person the same way that we get bonded into a relationship. This is where the difference of love shows up, because once you bond, you have empathy. Once you have empathy, you produce serotonin. You have what we call love, long-term bonding. The narcissist, the sociopath, on every study available shows deficiency in oxytocin. So everybody's wondering why this person moved on in 2 days, why this person cheated, why this person lied. And the answer is so obvious, because they're not bonded to you. So everybody talks about a mask, and the mask is not put on the first date. That's euphoric for all humans. The mask goes on stage 3. You're bonding, and you're like, I really love you. And the narcissist, the sociopath, the cluster B, the BPD, and I'm not picking on any of them. I'm just explaining medically what happens here, is that they put on a mask and they say, I'm really into you. I really love you. But at that point, they have no dopamine. So they're doing it to get you to give them stimulus so that they can have more dopamine. You are producing serotonin, cortisone, all kinds of chemicals and hormones that are going to bond you to this person the rest of your life. They are not. And this is where the nightmare begins, because the rest of the stages of love for you keep you there and don't keep them there. So that's why I use algorithms, because to get to this, I had to go study psychopaths, sociopaths, Alcoholics Anonymous, where we got our very name, Toxic Abuse Anonymous, because you literally are addicted to a relationship, whether it's good for you or not. I had to study studies about oxytocin, studies about cortisone. I have studied every single medical report there is out there, and I don't know why, but I have an ability to read tax code or medical studies like most people read a love romance. So I'm looking in places that nobody else is looking and just putting them together and saying these are related.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a lot of talk, so I want to listen for a little while instead of talk. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, you're certainly not wrong. Like there's so much out there that hasn't been quite connected yet. And I love the work that like Dr. Amen is doing. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He wrote a book called The End of Mental Illness, where he, not necessarily a perfect regimen for understanding everything, but it's a start of understanding mental health through the lens of studying the thing that actually does the mental health issues, and that's the brain, right? And so he's using the SPECT scans to understand blood flow through the brain, blood flow through the brain. Say that 5 times. But anyway, that idea of actually trying to understand what the brain is doing rather than just going through talk therapy is rather interesting. As why is it just happening now? We've had brain scans before, we've had the ability to do this before, but only now we're doing it. And
I could address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, 2 things I want to address. First thing is with Dr. Amen and quite a few others have now discovered, and most people don't realize this, that the vagus nerve comes off your cerebral cortex and travels down your neck and past your heart. When it gets to your heart, it actually puts 40,000 brain neurons, they think, in your heart. Then it travels to your intestine and puts another 400,000 brain thinking neurons in your intestines. So all these people like it's a gut feeling, it's butterflies, which we can talk about.
Okay.
No, it's actually your brain. We have spent so much time thinking the brain is located in our skulls, but our brain is a working nervous system between limbic and logical. So when your gut instinct, when you say gut instinct, you're not kidding. That's your gut turning around and squeezing your colon, squeezing your pancreas, saying something's wrong. That's an alert system. As far as why now, and the answer is so interesting. Why now is because of this pandemic. The pandemic itself, some people think the pandemic caused it, and I take a different view. all these toxic people that worked at jobs, let's say they're really toxic, so they got a 9 to 5 job. Somehow or another, they don't come home from their job till 10, 11 o'clock every night. You know what I mean? They're toxic. They got something else going on, but they're out of the house. And then all of a sudden, pandemic comes and they're home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're exposed. They can't maintain that image anymore. They're aggravated. They're missing income. They're missing friends. And all those text messages they've been hiding for years are showing up at the dinner table now because they were never at the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
And my theory, and it's only my opinion, is that the pandemic around the world exposed that these relationships were barely hanging on or not really loving relationships, and now squeezed together in one home, exploded all the toxicity all over the world. And everybody, divorce rates through the roof, breakup rates through the roof, singles are through the roof, depression is through the roof. So now you have all these toxic people in these relationships that were skimming by, home 24 hours, the relationships are failing. And now the universities are starting to study this and saying, holy, what's going on here? It's an exposure. It's not that it didn't exist. It's always existed, but that exposed it.
Yeah, not to mention I also think the concept of the pharmaceutical generation is also stepping into light. The forefront of medical pharmaceuticals is not so innocent in all the treatment of mental health as well.
Big money.
Yep.
If you follow the money, you will determine the behavior every time.
Yep.
One of the reasons, a lot of people say, especially when they talk about narcissists, is that they're evil. They're Satan. They're demons. Somebody made a lot of fun of me and created a little group to hate me because I said I'm no longer demonizing narcissists. It has to become a medical condition, straight up. It's got to become an oxytocin deficiency that doesn't bond. It's got to become the fact that they cannot have empathy because they do not bond to anything, so that a university will pick it up and fix it already, fix it. And they clipped the part that I said I won't call them demons and turned it into I love narcissists. And I have loved the narcissist. And it's brutal.
It's not enjoyable.
I
agree with you on that. And I think this is something I want to interrupt if you don't mind.
No, please.
That is a question that I've been pondering for most of my time on TikTok, because I've talked about narcissism, I've talked about abuse, I've talked about all of these things that we're talking about now. But I've never liked the idea of what narcissism has turned into. It's turned into a way to simplify something that's incredibly complicated. And in retrospect, looking at a lot of the relationships that I've had, I could look at people and call many of them narcissists, but the reality is they're probably not. I really think it's more of a spectrum. And then, yes, I absolutely agree with you that there's actually a medical condition, but it's a lot less than what we think it is, or at least what TikTok would tell us, what Instagram or Facebook or all the places where people share these ideas. I think people have narcissistic tendencies just as much as they have empathetic tendencies. And the historical nature of our own relationships determines that, and how we understand using them, using our empathetic tendencies or our narcissistic tendencies in relationships, compared to what you're talking about in some regards of a true narcissist is a sociopath, is a psychopath. They have absolutely a disconnection, a medical condition that says this is probably not going to change. And that certainly needs to be studied. It needs to be understood. But you can't just go around telling everybody that your ex-boyfriend's a narcissist just because you guys didn't get along. And it's a simplified excuse that can damage this man's life. And we're actively watching this destruction of male, the male species. It's almost like and it's difficult. And I could say the same thing for women. The male species is doing it to the female species because covert narcissism now, and it's remarkably more complicated than just saying everyone's a narcissist and it's a bad thing, because it's, yeah, go ahead.
Let's segregate this for a minute. Narcissistic behavior is in anybody who owns a mirror and an iPhone.
Yeah, pretty
Let's face
much.
it, if narcissism could fly, TikTok would be the largest airport in the world.
Yeah.
A bunch of people looking at themselves for likes from strangers that they can't do anything with. Like, you can't do anything with a like. I mean, nothing. I can't buy a cup of coffee with a million likes, but they're so important. And you're building neural pathways that say you get a reward for likes from strangers that you'll never meet, that you don't care about. And your identity is changing. So there is a new breed of narcissism coming. There's great studies about this out of Johns Hopkins University, that things like TikTok, Facebook, taking selfies, it's not healthy to take your picture 7 times a day if you're not a model. And if you are a model, look what happens to models. But NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, is very different than narcissistic. Narcissistic is behavior. NPD itself has already been proven since 2016 that narcissists have a thinning frontal lobe and an underdeveloped cerebral cortex through their DNA. They didn't become narcissists when trauma hit. The trauma could have been as simple as putting them on a school bus and separating them from their mother, which first exposed it. But the fact is NPD is pre-wired disorder, which is why there's no cure. If you're a little narcissistic, it could just be a defensive method from growing up in an old-fashioned household could do that to you. And some therapy will correct that if you so choose to correct it. But the actual NPD disorder, I don't believe it's as common. It's not as rare as you think. I did a great video that went pretty viral explaining just one point of view. So if you take Genghis Khan, he walked around this planet and he killed every man and child that existed, and then kept the women and raped them and created 257,000 babies. Now, what kind of person kills people at random to reproduce a world filled with yourself? That's a narcissist. He's also a psychopath, but he's a narcissist for sure. He has a lack of empathy. Well, 257,000 babies has now turned into 1 in 5 people on the planet are direct descendants of this man. So if there's 8 billion people, 20% of that is 1.6 billion narcissists have it in their DNA. Well, if a narcissist has 5 relationships, because they don't do long term, so if they've affected 5 romantic relationships in their entire life, well, that's 1.6 billion. That's 6 billion victims of narcissism. And that's why it's exploding so much, because as awareness comes through, people either say, I'm with the narcissist, I was with the narcissist, oh my God, my dad's a narcissist, my mom's a narcissist, because out of 1.6 billion, and let's face it, there are jungles out there filled with people and plains of Africa that don't have TikTok. So the people on TikTok are in populated areas. Well, you're going to run into more awareness. So is it true NPD? Probably not, but enough that it's going to be a wave of awareness now. And thank God, because they work very hard on curing COVID. They work very hard on curing lupus and cancer. But who the hell is going to work on this? And the only way to make it work on this is stop calling them devils, because if you call a narcissist a devil, he's going to hide. Nobody wants to be the devil if you got to go sell cars. Nobody wants to buy cars from the devil. So you're not allowed to be a narcissist. But if you have ADD, people go, oh, excuse my ADD. 30 years ago, if you had ADD, they'd hook electrodes up to your brain, shock you, and put you in a mental institution. Now it's like, excuse my ADD, I just got to pop this pill. Well, eventually narcissism could be the same, but you got to raise awareness, and you can't call them devils, so that they'll come out and say, hey, I got a problem. I can't get into a long-term relationship without cheating. You got a pill for that? Yes, we do. And that's why I'm doing this, because I have a grandchild already. I'm a little older than you. I love my grandchild, and I don't want them growing up in the world not knowing every video I make is so that my grandson could see them 20 years from now and say, I got some help from my grandpa. I won't
Yeah.
be doing it, you know? So,
No, I agree in with many of the things that you just said. I would question the numbers, but as many would. But I have heard, as you know, like the most, I would say, recent statistic I've seen is that potentially 3.5% of the population. And so that's the most secure number that I've seen, but I couldn't recall the source for you.
let's go with it.
Um, which
Let's
is
go with that number. So you have 8 billion people. That's 2.6, 260, 360. My brain is fried today. Why don't we just go with your number straight up? And it's not even your number. You can count on number, and I kind of count on that number too. So you got 8 billion. Wow, that's a big number, my friend. Times 0.035. So you got 280 million. You got 280 narcissists, 280 million narcissists. I would still agree. I mean, just my girlfriend alone had 15 relationships. I'm backing it off to 5.
Yeah.
She's had 15 relationships since we broke up.
Yeah.
So, and probably during our whole relationship. So you got 280 million, and if they have 5 relationships in their lifetime from age 20 to age 70, which is probably, I'm still being generous, it's probably 10, but
it's a
5
billion relationships
relationships.
or
Well, 280 million. You got 1.2 billion people of TikTok users. You know, again, this isn't being discussed in villages where they can't get water.
right.
This is being discussed in, you know, TikTok and Instagram and places like that. So you still have 1.3 billion people affected by this. That's a significant number.
Well, I like to narrow it down to realistically the population that sees me the most, and that's the United States. So you kind of look at, 3.5% of what, 350 million. And so that's, I think, a more relatable number for what you would see around, the United States. And it is it's such an interesting topic because it's under discussed in how to help narcissists overcome their situation or limit their effect. But it's certainly a discussion that's being had almost at an unrelenting pace for victims and survivors of this kind of abuse. And I like what you do because you have the ability to understand that it's two-sided, and that needs to be a part of the conversation, because when you have this unrelenting force of people that have been hurt by this stuff, you then have no limits because of this overwhelming sense of empathy for victims and survivors. And that's not always a good thing, and I look at this from a veteran standpoint of how the VA and how certain, how we've handled medical care for veterans. Overwhelming empathy for veterans has not really done anything for supporting veterans or telling the military how to actually help veterans. It's only really become, what I think, this is my theory, what's really changed the game is that the people that kind of got fucked over by the system in the military have since come forth and become leaders of the military and said, we can't do this anymore. And so,
Thank God.
and right. And so in the same light, should you absolutely share your story about your toxic abuse? I think so, at least to yourself, so that you can feel the power of your own truth. But should you denigrate an entire population of people that you have clearly no understanding of what has happened to them or how they operate, because of one person? That's a scary situation, right?
Plus, half the time, that one person is actually crying wolf. Relationships fail.
Yeah.
They fail all the time. And it doesn't need, so if you're in a relationship, I'm in a relationship with this woman and I really care for her and she doesn't really care for me, but there's a pandemic, or I got a nice house, I got a great car, whatever. It's just not a really great relationship. And then she dumps me and I start writing to her. I want you back. I want you back. I want you back. I want you back. She basically turns around and says, listen, if you keep messaging me, I'm going to block you. I don't want to block you, but I will because I got no interest here. Well, come on. Can we get together and have dinner? She blocks me. Now I call her a narcissist because she blocked me. That's not the way this works.
Yeah.
She couldn't wait to get away from you. Your relationship failed. And I see it, as and you do too. You see the same thing I do. As I mean, I'm a person that believes only God creates. So as people that make videos on TikTok, I don't like calling us creators per se, but you can say whatever you want. And so people look at our videos and they may read the comments on the video, but as a TikTok creator, you see all your videos and all the comments and you start compiling the information, you start looking at it and you start saying, you know what? Some of these people are the bad guy. Some of these people were in a bad place and somebody escaped them. They're not the narcissists. They just had to get away, and they're so bitter that they can't see that their own toxicity, their own childhood trauma is driving people away from them. And sometimes relationships just fail. I mean, it's just the way it is. You don't need a narcissist for a relationship to fail. You just need lack of communication, lack of loyalty, lack of respect. Boom, you got a bad relationship.
Yeah. And it leaving on amicable terms is certainly a rarity, I think, nowadays, simply because there's this expectation that when you get into a relationship, the unwritten rules and the unspoken rules are supposed to be well known. And we don't have the culture, and here's a difficult situation to kind of bring into a simple package. But culture 40 years ago was very much focused on, in America, was very likely, and I speak from my own race, right? White Christian religion very much dominated how courtship and dating and marriage and how all of that.
Rules.
There were unspoken, unwritten rules that were expected. Were they good rules? Probably not, right? Because obviously we see religious abuse. We see this religious indoctrination. We see certain issues that certainly come up when we talk about that. But the important thing is that culture created unwritten and unspoken rules that were understood. That is completely changing now, I think. And so when people get into a relationship, and certainly this hookup culture that kind of came from my generation has completely demolished the unspoken and unwritten rules of how dating and courtship happen. And people aren't engaging in those rules and saying, these are the expectations I have for our relationship. And rather than expecting this person to know this is how you define cheating, because cheating is a really complicated thing now more than ever, because before it was just, hey, if you go see this person and have intimate relations, this is cheating. If you have these feelings about this person with them and you discuss them and you talk about them and you do things, that's cheating. Well, now, who are you messaging? Who are you paying attention
Did you like?
Right, exactly. And so cheating becomes more complicated, and there's no understanding of what the expectations are in this relationship, because some people say liking pictures is not cheating. Talking to someone is not cheating. But ultimately there's a line somewhere. But where's the agreement? And this is expansive. There's so many different things that people don't know how to have conversations about. And so it becomes really complicated to step into a relationship that functions without the ability to communicate. And certainly one of the greatest weaknesses of people right now, I think, is communicating.
100%. It's horrible. Everything communication, if it doesn't fit into 2 lines of text, is not communication anymore.
Yeah. Right.
It's like, hey, do you want to go to dinner and go look at our phones from this restaurant or that restaurant? And so many people now that you speak to are like, well, I'm monogamous in all of my relationships. And it's like, monogamous used to be, you got married, you stayed married. That's monogamous. You can't be monogamous in a bunch of relationships. but and it certainly is a changing tide, and it was changing before us, and it will change again. And
Yeah.
I believe it swings back and forth as necessary. Um, Certainly, the introduction of a communication platform like the one we're on right now has changed everything.
Yeah.
We see people, I have people who follow me, and we do private coaching, and I have a huge team of coaches now. And we get people in there saying, he cheated on me. So then I'm sitting there spending a lot of time trying to understand the dynamic. And then it comes out, I'm like, wait a minute, you never met him? Like,
Yeah.
you've never actually met this person. And they're like, well, we spend a lot of time on the phone. I'm like, so we spent time on the phone with somebody else, and this affected you how? And I'm not trying to discount the feelings you can catch over the phone doing FaceTime, because you and I could become best friends.
Yeah.
People can become bonded to this person, but is your life so available that you have no plans of meeting this person, and they cheated on you by not meeting another person?
Yeah.
I,
It's
I don't even know how to respond to that to you.
yeah. And it requires, in this day and age, it certainly requires being very clear about expectations in terms of like you as a coach, you and I as a coach, we have to be remarkably clear about this is
Remarkable.
this is what we can do for you and this is what we can't do for you. Um, because of these misunderstood dilemmas that we're talking about, right? Like we
100%.
it,
Well put, by the way. Thank you.
of course, I've been doing this for quite some time now, and I look at I compare like how I speak compared to like some of the other creators that I watch, like Jordan Peterson. Jordan
Great.
Peterson very much tries not to tell people what to do, and gives as much information to this person to or anybody to help them self understand what is necessary in the discussion. But at times you see him outright just say like, this is what people really have to do. And it's and then that's where you see a lot of hate come towards him. And not saying he's a perfect individual, but he has great points and he's well thought. um and it's really interesting to see how people respond to people telling them what to do versus people helping them learn what to do or learn about themselves and how to make those decisions for themselves. And I think it's really undervalued to have people that have the ability to say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just going to tell you and expose to you what you have done and the consequences that exist. And now here are your options. How are you going to do this?
You are 100% on the money. I knew I would really enjoy speaking with you and getting different points of view, because you are right on. One of the reasons that we have experienced such explosive growth at our page and our other pages, we have several pages now of, Instagram, Facebook, everything else. We've spread like crazy. One of the reasons why is because our purpose is not to tell you what to do.
Mhm.
Our purpose is to let you know you're not alone. You're not crazy. And nobody's here to judge you. And perhaps we can offer you a different perspective that will get you thinking. We kind of see ourselves as conduits to professional therapists, because we give you a lot of people go into a therapist and therapist says, what's wrong? And you're like, I don't know. I don't feel good. So what we do is we motivate them to actually take perspective and say, oh my God, that's me. Okay, just take that video right to a therapist and say, this is me. This is how I identify. He's the snake. I'm the guy. Da, da, da. I'm the tortoise. He's the tarantula. And my videos are mainly a bunch of analogies so that people can understand something and say, wow, this guy's talking about me. So, and I get tens of thousands of those every day where it's like, are you speaking to me? Like it's so personal to them.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that especially in the lane I'm in, the narcissist, everybody wants to talk about a mask. But the phenomenal part about it is the mask is not something just fake. The mask is their very skin or gender identity. Because I don't care what gender they identify as, and I don't care if they're male or female or tall or short, the disorder leaves every victim, doesn't matter what part of the world you're from, apparently, feeling the same. No value, no validation, no self trust, no self love, no more empathy. They cut it off. They don't want it anymore, which is such a shame because if they understood their empathy and they understood that it's put there to interact with people and they are the light, they are the blessing on this planet. And they're so scared to use it again. So all we're doing is offering them another perspective so that they can understand. I mean, we can go into I can go right back into studies about this. One of the best studies ever done that I try and remind people of, basically, to sum it up, it's just this. They didn't leave you to find someone better. They just found somebody who doesn't know any better. They don't know what they're entering into. So there's this great study that shows a group of sociopaths, and they are giving an artificial intelligence, an AI program. And they say, here, design your perfect person, brunette, blonde, Chinese, it doesn't matter, whatever you like. You could just make up this perfect person. So that all the sociopaths create their perfect mate. Then they give it psychological questions. Well, is your mate submissive, dominant, talkative, quiet? Every single thing that you can imagine in the world's most perfect mate. And just like cheating can be done, as you said, by talking or videoing with somebody else, well, now you're looking at an actual, even though it's AI, you're looking at an actual human being that's talking to you, and probably the world's smartest AI. So all the sociopaths get together, they create their perfect AI, and they have monthly meetings. And they all admit they have caught feelings for this AI. They're in love because the AI is programmed to love bomb them back and react that way. So now they're in love with an artificial intelligence, which, I mean, I'm looking at you right now, but I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at a pixelized version of you.
Right.
That's not you. That's a pixelized version of you. Well, they are looking at a pixelized version that is prettier than you and I combined, probably.
Right.
And but by the 120th day, all the sociopaths get together and all they talk about is how they're abusing the AI. The very thing they were in love with, they are now abusing mentally, physically through the use of text, but they are abusing this thing. And what that tells us is this: if you are the victim of abuse, your role in it is purely incidental. If there was no other way for this, everybody sits there and says, well, if I didn't say this, if I didn't say that, if I didn't do this, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Maybe they went wrong. The most perfect creature on earth was going to be abused because this is what an abuser does. It was just your turn that you somehow attached yourself to somebody that was going to do that. So what we talk about in my group is the fact that you cannot change that person from abusing. That's what they're going to do. But you can change what part of you wants to go back to a toxic relationship. So some of the staples of us, like we've recreated the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in 4 different languages so that we can, because our program is worldwide. But, if you look at an alcoholic who hasn't had a drink in 5 years, and God bless them for not doing it, but they sit there and say, oh my God, I want to drink. And the answer is no. You're human. You're thirsty. You want water, but you built a neural pathway that says every time you're thirsty, drink alcohol. Well, if you're an empath, you just broke up with somebody, you want affection.
Yeah.
Empaths love affection. We're the best huggers in the world. We cuddle strong. So you want affection, but you've built a neural pathway, a habit, a bad habit, that affection can only come from that toxic person. Just being in the relationship with the toxic person created a neural pathway where you had to constantly tell your subconscious, you're speaking out loud, but telling your subconscious, I love it. I love you. No, I love you. Of course I no, of course I didn't cheat on you. I'll never cheat on you. Your subconscious heard that. I love you. Your subconscious heard that. So now you're not even in a relationship with this person. They're gone. But your subconscious has already built the neural pathways that say you love that person. You will never be with another person. You would never cheat on that person. You only want to hug that person. So those habits are what we have to redo. We have to recreate the bonds in your brain, the neural pathways, so that you stop looking at this person as your source of affection and start looking internally. Self-love is the root from which all else grows. Boundaries are like the bark around a tree.
Yep.
Got to keep the insects and the animals out. So
What's interesting about, because I know a little bit about trees, because I have a friend that tells me all about them. The bark and the space just underneath the bark is actually where most of the tree basically bleeds, right? And so it's really interesting to look at trees in comparison to relationships like boundaries, because if you don't have good boundaries, you are destroying the very thing that gives you life, right? The lifeblood of the tree is the same thing as the lifeblood of you. And if you don't maintain boundaries, you aren't maintaining your identity, and you lose sight of where you end and someone else begins.
that's right.
You know,
What
and
what? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll go. No, you go ahead.
This is what I say on most of my live events when they start talking about this, and I do say that saying that it's been said so many times that we don't even know who started it. But self-love is the root from which all else grows. So the next thing I do is I ask the group, is a peach tree selfish? People go, how could a tree be selfish? I say, okay, well, it's got roots. It's got roots.
Mm-hmm.
And the roots are pulling nutrients and making sure that any storm that hits that tree, it stands up. Is that selfish? And people say, no, it's needed. I say, okay, that's needed. Well, the bark around the tree. Well, that's needed because if not, every animal that wants to sharpen its claws or every insect that wants to drink the nectar from right underneath the bark would come in and steal it all. So if it didn't have a strong boundary of bark, by the time it gave fruit, the fruit would be bitter. It wouldn't have any sweetness to it because the animals would have sucked it all out of it. So your roots are very important. Self-love is the root. What protects you is your boundaries, just like the bark around a tree. And if you look at a tree, you cut it open, you'll see every year that it got older, it built a new boundary. Those rings are showing a new boundary to protect the bigger, better fruit tree. So why is it that when a tree has bark around it and protects itself, but still gives fruit, why are you being selfish? By protecting your inner self with your bark and protecting your roots. And, typically I'll say, look, if you think it's selfish to have self-love, let me put it to you this way. If you're on a plane and it's going down and the airbags come down, what is the first thing they will tell you to do? You're sitting right next to your loved one, your child. What do they tell you to do? Go ahead, Dylan. What do they tell you?
Save yourself.
Put your mask on first.
Yep.
Because if you don't, there's no way in hell you're going to save your 3 children. So you got to save you first. Get your mask on first. And that is just the basis of everything. If you are decaying on the inside, who the hell could you help? I did something where I don't keep it out, but I held up my watch and I said, this is a so-and-so watch. And it's 100% genuine. And part of owning it is understanding how it works, where it came from. It was a Patek, it was a watch. And saying, if you tried to sell me a fake watch like this, I would just laugh at you. I'd say, are you kidding me? That's fake. I got the real thing, buddy. So how come somebody was able to give me fake love and I believed it? So I'm smart enough to know what a fake watch is, but I'm not smart enough to know what fake love is.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I had to start looking internally. How could I not know what real love feels like? Only one answer. I must not have any.
Yeah.
Probably for myself.
Yeah.
It's the only logical answer. I'm not ashamed to say it either because, you've probably seen this video because it was viral, but he was a really tough guy in London. doing an interview somewhere, and he said, you know, when my friends mess up, I grab him by the shoulders. I say, we got this, buddy. We'll fix it in 2 seconds. This is a really tough guy, like one of those guys you just don't mess with. You know what I mean? Like, just he's tough. And he said, when my friends mess up, I grab them. I say, we got this. We'll fix this. Come on, that's nothing. But when I mess up, I go into a quiet place and I go, oh my God, what the hell is wrong with you? You stupid. How could you mess up?
Yeah.
If I talk to my friends the way I talk to myself, I'd have no friends. There's a real truth in that. Like, we will do amazing things for the people we love and consider ourselves selfish for doing anything like that for us. And the truth is that in most toxic relationships, the person being abused is giving unconditional love. To get through the relationship, they have to have no conditions. Okay, you can lie to me, manipulate me, cheat on me. You could do whatever you want to me. I'll still love you. Unconditional. But how are they treating themselves then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've always looked at, I wrote a whole book on love in my book, or I'm sorry, whole chapter on love in my book. And one of the things I think I've come to understand about love is that when you create it, I look at it as a one-way road, right? So in your conceptualization of action without expectation, you are simply giving, right? And with
Sure.
that expectation or that lack of expectation, you don't need anything from someone else to keep giving it, right? If I appreciate you as a person, I'm going to continue to give to you simply because I can and because I want to. Now, in a relationship, in a marriage, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't necessarily bode well, because there's supposed to be expectations in a marriage. There's supposed to be expectations in a relationship. And so how you define the expectations need to be within the relationship itself, right? And so as the society has crafted this conceptualization of marriage, and there's fundamental expectations within that relationship that, if unspoken, that's why we craft vows before our marriage, and we say, this is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to support you through sickness and in health, and financial despair, and struggles, all of it. I'm going to be there for you. And what we fail to define is that when those expectations are not met within the relationship, we very much struggle with the idea of accountability, of how am I going to look at you as a person and say, you're not holding up your end of the bargain. And if you mix love with those expectations, and this is where, I think it can get really confusing in a relationship of both sides, whether you're abused or not. I think abusers often look at this idea of accountability and take advantage of the fact that someone won't hold them accountable for not meeting up with the expectations built within the relationship, whereas those who have been abused are more or less unable or incapable of separating the idea of unconditional love from the idea that the relationship has expectations, if that makes sense.
To reply to that, I would say this. Most people aren't familiar with the term synergy. So a synergy is something that equals more than the sum of its parts. 1 + 1 should always equal 2, but when there's a synergy, it equals 3. A marriage or a traditional family setting is a perfect example. One person plus one person, all of a sudden you got a baby. Now there's more than this. How did we get more than you and me? So I tend to look at a relationship always as, I'm me, and I got a one-way, just like you said, I got a one-way street. I got to give to this relationship. You're you got to give to the relationship. But why don't we treat the relationship like another thing, like a person, a living, breathing thing that needs this to survive? I used to make this joke about my ex and I said, well, a relationship is not 50-50, it's 100-100. And I put in my 100 all the time, and she puts in 100. Like, she does like 4% on Monday, 6.5% on Tuesdays, maybe 20% on Wednesday, because we usually go out on Wednesday shows. She's kind of in on Wednesdays, but then Thursday she's not really in, so that's 18%. Kind of adds up to 100%. And the problem is that if you don't treat your, I used to say to my ex all the time, I'm like, I didn't lose anything, and you didn't lose anything. Our relationship is losing oxygen, and it's going to die. And then I'm going to go back to being me, and you're going to go back to being you. And we kind of enjoyed this relationship. So why don't we respect it and actually do things for the relationship, just for the relationship? Because if we separate, I'll go back to being me. It's a funny thing, again, with self-love, because I went into the relationship knowing how to play the piano. I went into the relationship knowing how to do public speaking. I went in with confidence. I went in with whatever I went in with. Then the relationship was over, and I came out and I knew how to play the piano, and I had my confidence. I had no love. The only answer to things like this is I didn't bring the love to the table. I didn't have any self-love when I showed up at the table. So when I left, I didn't have any again. I had my ability to play a piano and complain about it through music, but I didn't, most people don't understand that the songs they're listening to, the person who wrote them didn't even know, but they were in a relationship with a narcissist. And that's why you identify with it. I don't want to fall in love with, if you listen to like Wicked Games or Hallelujah, every damn song is almost like, holy shit, this guy was in love, or this woman was in love with a narcissist. And they don't, or a narcissistic person, let's agree that way.
Yeah.
That it was so bad, and they don't even realize, because their venue is not to go Google or join groups like ours. Their venue is to write music. So they wrote beautiful music about lack of communication, lack of respect, being shut out. Adele is the perfect example of the world. Most people don't know this example, but when she hit it big, she was with the ultimate narcissist. Like you got to crown this guy. And when she made millions of dollars, he came back and sued her in public forum and said, you owe me half. If I didn't mess you up so bad, you would have never wrote those songs. So I'm entitled. You got to you got to put your hands up at that point and say, okay, you're the winner. We're going to replace whoever's picture of ultimate narcissist is with yours. You are the winner. You want to be rewarded for the abuse you did to this woman. So, I don't know. It's a wave. It's a wave of awareness, and it's really going somewhere. Where are we going next? My only advice to people is, listen, if you were involved, grieve and leave. Just call it what it is. Grieve, leave, move on. You don't need to have relationship problems with people that you're not in a relationship with.
Yeah.
So, and that's the problem, is that we see all these people. I'm sure you get it on your videos. People scrolling by, saw a video, and they decide to make a hateful comment. It's like, we're not in a relationship. You don't need to, you could have just kept scrolling. It's okay. Yeah. We're okay with it. But whatever.
What I find remarkable is I get it so rarely. Like I just don't, I get hate comments so rarely. And I don't know.
You're a likable guy.
I try and give content that's not necessarily not controversial, but very specific,
inspiring.
Yeah. It's just not something that you can really hate on. Certainly some of it is, but it's so rare that I get anything. And maybe that means I'm being safe with how I discuss these things, but maybe I should step out of my comfort zone and be a little bit more sassy. We'll see.
It's working.
Yeah,
it's working. It is. Why don't fix things that are working?
Yeah. Oh, certainly.
No need to fix what's already working.
Yeah.
And your page is certainly working. Like I said, I've been a fan of yours well before I even made my page. I was, I get a lot of inspiration, especially from your story, by the way, not just a quick, I heard a quote, I do those too. I heard this quote.
Yeah.
But but your story itself of rebuilding yourself is inspirational. You are inspirational. So, my page, because it deals with so much toxicity, I don't get any hate. I get a lot of narcissists who say, can you stop giving away my secrets?
Mm-hmm.
I get a lot of that. I'm like, no, I will not. Go away.
Yeah.
But, People say the best things in life are free, and they're talking about love, but love is not free. You must give up something that you really don't want to give up. You are coveting something that all your life that you don't want to give up. And if you want to experience love, you are going to have to be brave enough to give up the part of you that thinks it's not lovable. You're going to have to actually give up your fear of not being loved in order to experience love. And this is the problem with all this damage is these people have reinforced that fear in somebody that was codependent in the first place. There's some brilliant speakers out there who talk about how we became empaths, what an
Mhm.
empath is. I don't know if you follow those people, but
Yep.
I can sum it up pretty quickly. If you look at like Teal Swan,
Yep.
she will say, an unpredictable parent made you enhance your empathy in order to avoid conflict because you're walking in, you don't know if you're getting a hug or a slap. So you had to have empathy to measure the room. Well, then you grow up, you're attuned to conflict. So that's the first thing you pick up on in a room. And empaths can do that. They can read a room very quickly and pick up the one problem, but they don't know they're picking up a problem. So they go talk to it. Next thing you know, they're in a hotel. So they don't, parents don't train children how to use empathy. And more importantly, parents don't train children what is this trust? Because you can use your empathy and you can give kindness to everyone. But trust must be earned.
Yep.
And people don't understand. They give you, I'll trust you till you screw me over. No, no, no. If you hand your trust out like a pamphlet on the street, people are going to throw it on the street like a pamphlet. Make every single person earn your trust. And if they won't, let them leave your life right now. And if they do, they'll value it and they will not break your trust. Pretty simple rules. It's just people don't think of it that way.
Trust is always an interesting conversation for me because I don't look at trust, I think, through the traditional lens of how I feel like society likes to look at trust as a almost an ultimatum of sorts of if you do anything that is not in any way, shape, or form beneficial for me, I can't trust you. Or at least that's what I think a lot of people kind of view it as. And I look at it very differently in terms of I trust that you're going to do what's in your self-interest. And it's that simple, right? If it's bad or good, it doesn't matter because it's in your self-interest to do whatever you want to do, and I look at empaths and narcissists the same. They're incredibly selfish in how they operate because empaths benefit from being selfless, but yet it's still a selfish idea of how you operate. It's not a bad thing. I don't look at selfishness or selflessness as bad or good. They just are what they are. And so narcissism, I don't think is all that much different, and speaking of Teal Swan, she sees it that way, is that right? They're on two ends of the spectrum through the same kind of selfish behavior.
Complex trauma.
Yeah, it's and I wouldn't even say it's necessarily just trauma. I think it's an inability to comprehend human interaction, and certainly trauma is one of those things. But I've worked with people that haven't had outright forcible or even you could say verbal abuse, but is that trauma? It's a good question. uh you know and these
Can be.
people, right, but it's all perception, right? It's all a matter of relativity of like, do you think it's trauma or not? And if you think it is, it is. And so what's interesting is that it's not necessarily any kind of physical trauma always. It's not always grief. It's not always loss. Sometimes it's literally just, do you have an understanding of how humans communicate? Do you have an instinctual understanding of how to do that? And if you don't, oftentimes what you do is you try to make a set of rules that don't necessarily fit all the pictures. It fits the picture that has always benefited you, and you recreate that painting every time. And so that's what I see in terms of someone will go from a narcissistic father to a narcissistic boyfriend, and then another narcissistic boyfriend, or a narcissistic husband then, and then they feel like this has always just kept happening to me, but I don't know how to solve it, because realistically, we've never stepped into how you've interacted with everyone in your life. It's always been the same, because the picture has never changed in how you view yourself and how you view others and how you communicate in all of those relationships.
It's a funny thing, but there's a great expression out there that is very incomplete, and the expression is, "You marry your mother, or you'll marry your father."
Yeah.
But that is not the expression. That is the couch potato expression. It came from Sigmund Freud, who said, "You will seek out in a mate the unresolved conflict you have with your cross-gender parent."
Yeah.
So what happens with parents that fight all too much, and this is probably the basis of all of us, is that when parents fight with each other, children don't know the difference between parents and themselves. They're half dad, half mom. So when parents create this hostile environment, they don't stop loving the parent. They stop loving themselves. And they say, they're fighting over me, and if I wasn't here, they wouldn't be fighting. They'd be happy.
Yeah.
So you're looking at it through the eyes of a 3-year-old. So basically, if you're going to walk around and say two things, if you're a girl, or if you're a little girl, and you say, why, and children don't normally pick the right side. They pick whatever side they pick. So they can turn around and say, well, why is daddy so nice to me and so mean to mommy? Mommy must not love daddy right. When I grow older, I'll meet a man like daddy and I'll love him right. And then that person will be nice to me always. Well, okay, you need therapy. Or why, just as simply, I don't understand. Daddy's very mean to mommy. Why does mommy stay? If you want to find out that answer, you got to go find somebody that's going to be mean to you and then be locked in and stay anyway, because leaving is very bad. Or,
And that
trying to resolve a
question,
conflict that isn't your conflict,
and
because an inner child is asking a really bad question, which is why.
that question becomes elevated to the level of adults asking the same question, which is always quite interesting, because until you've really faced the conflict, and I wouldn't even say you have to be in it, but you have to see both sides of the picture to know what that really feels like, and to know how that conflict
100%.
operates on multiple different levels, right? How does it operate in the parents? How does it operate in the kids? And then, how does it operate within the relationship itself? And until you really step into that, you don't know what you're talking about when you ask a question like that of, why don't
Right.
you just leave? Like, it's not that fucking simple, right? Like, you can't just
Yeah.
expect someone to step out of this relationship because they don't understand how.
What you said before, I sum up as, people do what makes sense to them at the time they do it. That was your reply to trust.
Mhm.
I expect people to act in their own self-interest. It's not even that to me. It's people. That's why I do not judge anyone. I can't be you. I don't know. If when somebody says, if I was you, I'm like, you ain't, and you would have been dead already. But people will always do what makes sense to them at the time that they do it, whether it's self-motivation, selfless motivation, whatever it is. It made sense to them to do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it. One way or another, they wouldn't do it, but it makes sense. There's some rationale behind people's actions that you can never know, because there's no way for them to communicate it. Half the time, they don't know. It just seemed to make sense at the time.
Mhm.
And we have an entire globe of people doing this. And usually it's for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Everything's for the wrong kind of reason. And hopefully I have a theory though on all this, on what you do, on what I do, on what they do, even people I don't like what they do. A rising tide raises all ships. So if we keep adding to awareness and keep understanding as a group, and people get little tidbits of information as they scroll by, little by little, the tide comes up, and humans, hopefully, will be better at this. Hopefully, I mean, I don't know who said it, but good times create weak people create bad times create strong people create good times, and that's just the way it is. I'm willing to accept that as fact at this point. I have never learned anything on a mountaintop, but I'll tell you, that concrete's pretty hard, and I've hit it a couple of times, and you learn a lot of lessons on the rocks, down on that concrete. And you probably know how hard that concrete can get.
I do. And it's interesting you bring up that quote. I have a love-hate relationship with that quote because it's a good quote, and I'll give it that. And I like it, but I think it's used wrong in a lot of situations, right? Like with this one, I agree with how you use it, right? I understand it. It makes sense. But I think, especially on TikTok, that has been used a lot. And it's been used a lot to talk about the weakness of specific groups like men, right? Like certainly. And that's where I have a very difficult time because it's often used by people that are way off base in how they approach people in general, right? And so and I can't say exactly who. I just know it's been used in places where I just don't agree with it. Because what that quote makes me really question is it makes me ask this question of, is it easier to make a strong, or I'm sorry, a hard person soft or a soft person hard? And resoundingly, I think the answer is quite simple when you look at things like basic training, when you look at tragedy. It's much easier to make a soft person hard than thinking about veterans coming home from Afghanistan than making a hard person soft again. And so we look at society, we look at men specifically as you have to be hard. You have to be you have to be aggressive, you have to be strong, you have to be all of these things that are very easy in some regards to develop within yourself, because all it takes is a little bit of trauma, a little bit of tragedy, a little bit of discipline. And not to say discipline's easy, but it's a lot easier than going in reverse and saying, I don't need to be hard anymore. I don't need to be traumatized anymore. I don't need to be at war anymore because I'm at home. And it brings up a lot of questions for me when that quote's used in the wrong circumstances, because I don't think a lot of people really understand what that really means to be strong or weak or anything.
I think any quote, once you individualize it down, once you drill down and unpack it, it will not apply.
Yeah.
I don't care what quote, but once it, those that would give up 1 ounce of freedom for 1 ounce of security are entitled to neither. Now that quote stands pretty much true, except for one thing. I got to protect my family. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's Dylan's job to go out and fight for freedom, not mine. Now that can't be true. So as soon as we drill it down to me, and I'm a Navy family, by the way, so as soon as you drill it down to somebody personal, the quote doesn't apply because the quote is for an upper layer. You have to apply your own principles to the quote. What am I doing to contribute? Am I making good people or bad people? Because if you make enough bad people, and I don't know how to define bad people, and I don't know how to define good people because perspective is everything.
Yep.
I tell this story to teach people about perspective. I tell it 2 different ways. Depends on the crowd I'm with. First thing I'll say is this. Everything is made up of energy, right? So you're sitting at a table right now?
Yeah, desk.
Is the table moving?
No, but technically, yes.
Table is filled with energy that's moving so fast that our human eyes can't see it move, so we perceive it as solid. I do it much more lighthearted about a friend of mine, and I say, I have this friend, he reads a new book every week, he works out every single day, he eats 3 healthy meals, and he has sex every single day, sometimes twice a day. Does he have a good life?
Perspective.
He's in prison.
Yeah.
It's all perspective.
That's brutal. Yeah.
Pretty sure he's not loving it. I mean, he's
Yeah.
okay. He's doing okay. He's alive. But when you put it back in perspective, it's like, oh, no, he can keep his life. I'll
Yeah.
have my life. So it's it's all about perspective and how we think about things. It always is.
Yeah. And that's
Anyway,
why we
I
have these
have a
conversations.
I have a coaching call I have to do that somebody booked me for, and I didn't even realize coming up shortly, and I have to actually prepare for that.
It's all good. Well, let's finish this out with the final question that I ask everybody. If there was one message you could leave the world, what would it be?
You are not your trauma. That's it.
Too
There's
easy.
so much more.
Yeah. Too easy. Well, Adam, it was a pleasure having you. It's a pleasure meeting you.
It was a pleasure. I feel privileged being here. Like I said, I'm going to keep following you. And
Likewise.
all right.
Likewise.
Well,
Well,
now I'm going to have you on Lights On, my podcast. We'll
absolutely.
have a good time.
Absolutely. I'd love to. Just for the viewers out there, if you haven't followed Adam, go check out Toxic Abuse Anonymous on TikTok. You'll find his logo and you'll see his wonderful face staring back at you once you open the profile. Go check out his videos. Go check him out. Check out his link tree, and we'll catch you next time on the Dylan Experience.